I felt that I really should explain why I have the approach I have to some extent, and what I find provokes it in books like Eusebius. He's talking about, in this one chapter, 5 and 6 of book 2, when the followers of James, at least, seems to leave Jerusalem before its destruction. Here those that believed in Christ, having removed from Jerusalem as if holy men, had entirely abandoned the royal city itself and the whole land of Judea, the divine justice for their crimes against Christ and his apostles, finally overtook them, destroying the whole generation of these evildoers from off the earth. So this is where these charges that I've been talking about come from, and I think these charges are not felicitous in terms of promoting human understanding and tolerance and charity. But the number of calamities which then overwhelmed the whole nation, the extreme misery to which particularly the inhabitants of Judea were reduced, the vast numbers of men and women, with women and children that fell by the sword and famine, and again, I don't think Jesus would approve of this either, as I told you, and innumerable other forms of death, gloating in this way over retribution of some kind that was supposedly visited upon a group of people because a supernatural being had undergone a certain amount of suffering, who in fact was supernatural anyway, so it really didn't matter very, very much. The innumerable forms of other deaths, the numerous and great cities of Judea that were besieged, as also the great and incredible distresses that those experienced who took refuge in Jerusalem as to a place of perfect security. These facts, as well as the whole tenor of the war, and each particular its progress, which finally the abomination of the desolation, according to the prophetic declaration, stood in the very temple of God, so celebrated of all, but which now is approaching its total downfall and final destruction by fire. All this was written, as I say, in the history of Josephus. It may be too little to say that 300,000 that flocked from all parts of Judea for the Passover were shut up like in a prison. Then in chapter 6 he goes on to quote from the 5th book of Josephus, because he hasn't had enough there. And he goes on to describe the famine in the city as the city was besieged. People had to, there was a madness that overtook the city, and people had to burst into houses to search for food, and when they found nothing, they tortured each other when they concealed it. The body of poor wretches, however, were evidence enough for whether they had or they had not. And then many people who were in good health, they tortured them because they figured they had food. Many secretly exchanged their property for a single measure of wheat. By the way, if you've seen the pictures of the Warsaw Ghetto, as that was slowly starved and destroyed with bodies lying all over the street and people going around in carts to carry the bodies off. In our own generation, this is not an unsimilar picture here. And he describes this whole thing in pages. For famine surpasses all other evils, on page 88 of my book. All men were beaten, nor was there any pity for gray hairs. They also derived terrible modes of torture to discover where there was any food. The tormentors themselves have suffered no want. Anyway, he's quoting Josephus here, basically. It was a happy circumstances, yet if in addition to robbery they were also not slain. But when all hope of egress was cut off, and the famine now penetrated deeply, was consuming the people by houses and family. The houses were filled with women and children that had thus perished. The byways were filled with dead bodies of old. The sick were not even able to bury the dead. And he goes on and on and on to describe this situation here. As Titus went around those and saw them filled with dead and the deep gore flowing around the putrid body, he groaned heavily. This is Josephus. And he called to God to witness none of this was his work. Again, their blood be on their own heads. And that's pretty important presentation. And then he goes, he's not finished there. But he goes on about how this woman eats her own children. For instance, in the next 2 pages, urged by frenzy and necessity of her counselor, she proceeded against nature herself, Seizing her little son, who was yet at her breast, she said, "Wretched child, in the midst of war, famine, and faction, for what do I preserve thee? Our condition among the Romans, so that though we might live as slavery, but even slavery is anticipated by famine, and the assassins are more cruel than either. Come, and be thou food to me, fury to the assassins. And this is my own son," she said, "and the deed is mine. Eat, for I too have eaten, but not more delicate than a woman, nor more tender." So she eats her own son. Thenceforth the wretched people, overcome with hunger, only strove to hasten death. And it was happiness yet for those who died before they heard and saw miseries such as these. Such then was the vengeance that followed the guilt and impiety of the Jews against the Christ of God. Now, look, I am not off base in bringing this into some scrutiny. I think you will admit, as a Christian, I'm sure